Are you searching for teacher CPD that leads to change, illuminates best practice and inspires your staff? Well, look no further. InnerDrive's Teacher CPD Academy is just what you need. The Teacher CPD Academy now also includes our Teaching Unpacked series, with Doug Lamoff exploring and analysing what great teaching looks like in the classroom. Email us now at tnt@innerdrive.co.uk to grab a free trial. That's tnt@innerdrive.co.uk.
Welcome to Tea and Teaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Howell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. Are you good?
It's been a while. I'm good, buddy. It's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, I'm excited for episode 2 with Yamina.
Yeah, so we spoke all about Oracy and education in episode 1. Will she come back for episode 2? Let's find out now. Yamina, do you want to come back for episode 2?
Yes, please. That was too much fun.
Oh, that was lucky. Who knows what could have happened there, listeners? Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so Yamina, episode 1, we talked about what is Oracy, what does it mean, what's the benefits of it. So what we want to do in episode 2 is take it down to like a school-based level, because I'm going to assume that this is something, as with anything in education, this is better to have a joint-up approach. It's better to have a whole school approach to this. So can you enlighten us? What does a good whole school approach to Oracy look like?
Thank you. Great question. I think, like we talked about in the first episode, vocabulary is at the heart of it. So what does it mean to kind of speak like a mathematician or a PE student or a geographer or an English, whatever it is. And I think that needs to be mapped out from a whole school approach. Like, actually, this is where the senior leader or whoever's leading on Oracy needs to make that whole school approach. So explicitly teaching Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary. And Tier 3 we know is obviously subject specific. Kind of what does it mean? Actually teaching things like the vocabulary through choral rehearsal, through teaching meaning, through pronunciation, having a whole school approach, even how you teach that Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary, I think is really important. Ros Wilson, I think in her book, calls it the sophisticated kind of vocabulary as suave words, like those words that are really, really important. It's a great book, by the way. I'd highly recommend it. But actually having those suave words that we explicitly teach. So that's the first thing. You can do that in your subject areas. But I think also from a whole school approach, form time, it needs to be capitalized on more. This is a time where actually we've got with the whole school in these rooms, they see the same person, maybe not, but see the same person pretty much every day. Why aren't we having a form time session on a termly basis, on a weekly basis, whatever it is, however you want to map it out, that actually teaches students what it means to have effective to speak effectively, articulate their ideas effectively. What does it mean to effectively listen? What do's that actually look like? And Voice 21 break this down into like those 4 categories, one of them being physical. Like what does somebody who's effective listening do? They might nod along, track the speaker, all those sorts of things. Some of those things are controversial, and I get that. But I think ultimately what we want to do is teach young people what that effectively means, so that it's not just about school, it's about wider society, right? Like when you're in those interviews, when you're applying for a job, all of those things really do matter. When you're a comedian and you're standing up and you're talking, what does that actually look like? So having a whole school approach through form time by teaching explicitly kind of vocabulary, but giving staff, curriculum leaders and form tutors the opportunities to practice that themselves. So real whole school training is really important. I think sometimes, honestly, again, like I said earlier or in the last podcast, is just a bolt-on. And actually, if we really say that without Oracy there's nothing, then we need to prioritise it within our SIPs. Like our school improvement plans need to have that as a priority every single year. And it doesn't have to be that you do everything in one go, right? You can say in year 1, we're going to spend some time mapping out Tier 3 vocabulary in our school, in our subject areas, and we're going to spend time teaching that explicitly to our students. 10 keywords per year that they're going to learn from year 7 to 11. And that's what we're going to do in year 1. Then in year 2, we're going to then teach students how to listen effectively. Year 3, we're going to teach the physical, whatever it is. We don't have to do all of it, all 4 things at the same time. And I think that is a really strategic way of doing that, rather than just trying to teach everything all at once. I think there's also kind of strategies that we can potentially teach explicitly and do that as a whole school kind of approach. I'm obsessed with dialogic teaching. If you know me, I've written about it, I've blogged about it, I've like tweeted about it, all sorts of things. And I think dialogic teaching, and it comes from Robin Alexander's book, all about dialogic teaching, is about giving students opportunities to express their ideas, to articulate their ideas. The teacher is more of a facilitator rather than actually the person who's in charge, who's kind of the sage on the stage or whatever they call it. Actually Socratic debate and dialogic teaching is much more about the young people or the students having ownership over that discussion. And that can be done in any subject. I think lots of people think dialogic teaching can only work in humanities-based subjects. I've seen it work in PE. I've seen it work in science, in maths, in lots of different subjects. And I think a great teacher is also a great teacher of oracy, explicitly teaching young people what that looks like effectively.
What I'm interested in, you mean like what you spoke about, like, is just creating opportunities for this to happen in classrooms. And we know what the pushback is within schools of like, I've got so much to get through with my curriculum, or so much through my day, or form time. I'm just trying to make sure they've all got their tie on. So like, Mike, if I throw this to you, I'm just interested how you bring this idea of something that we know is important, but there's that easy pushback of like, I want to do this, but I've got to do something else. Like, how do you, as a school leader or as a school SLT maybe, be like, no, like, we're going to really like push this and make sure this is happening?
A couple of ways. I think Yamina absolutely hit nail on the head in terms of like teaching the physical signs of speaking and listening. Most schools will have something like slant, or we have slate because we added an E at the end because we were so fed up with kids fiddling with pens when the teacher's talking. So we have empty hands. Your hands are not fiddling with things when someone's talking. You're focused on them. Things like that.
Let's go through all those, Mike, just in case someone doesn't know what you mean by slate.
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. So sitting up. So if I say to my class, slates, please, they will all shuffle and sit upright. Listening, the A has escaped me.
Maybe ask questions or
ask questions. Yep, thank you. Tracking the teacher or tracking the board, and then empty hands. So they're just good habits for, I think, students to get into to show that they are being attentive. So little things like that. But also, I think if people are giving you pushback and saying, well, I've got so much content to get through, and you're telling me I've got to get better grades at this, or Oracy is not the outcome. Oracy is the vehicle, right? So we're going to get those better grades. We're going to get those better outcomes by teaching students to be better communicators. So that would be my pushback, is if you want to get all these outcomes, let's look at the process and let's get the process right. And part of that process is teaching students really, really good oracy.
You mean, there was a lot of nodding there. I was just like...
Open and right.
Kind of...
No,
Yamina disagrees completely, everyone who's listening. I was just like building on that. You mean like you're a super experienced school leader. You work with a lot of schools, coaching all that. Is there anything else you'd add to that of just like, how do you bring this in from us kind of, when you're sitting around that SLT meeting, you're like, oh, we want to do this. There's a lot to say this is what we want to do, but how you actually kind of pass that on to the teaching staff.
Yeah, I was definitely nodding along to show that I was agreeing with everything Mike was saying. I think there's also just that buy-in is the stories we tell. Like, as a school leader, I think so much of leadership is about the stories we tell to our staff, our students, our parents, any stakeholder within the community, any member of the community. And Oracy, I think, is quite... I understand that school leaders, actually teachers might say, oh, I haven't got time to do any of this, but actually it's about the story that we tell. Ultimately, Oracy, I think, more than anything else, is the key skill they're going to take away whatever job they go and do. They're going to have to communicate one way or another. It doesn't matter what role you do, you will have to communicate, because you'll have to sit on an interview panel, or you have to be, sat opposite somebody who's going to ask you questions, and you're going to have to be able to listen to understand and then respond. It's our families will understand that actually without Oracy they can't express their ideas, they can't challenge even. And I think for me Oracy is also about self-advocacy. How do you teach our young people to advocate for themselves if they can't express themselves? And again, as somebody who is neurodiverse, sometimes I find it really hard when somebody's put me on the spot and I'm trying to figure out what I want to say. And actually I do just need that thinking time. But I can express it, I just need to be able to articulate it. But if we haven't... So that's why I think the stories that we tell and the way in which we build that buy-in is really, really important. Because for me, Oracy, I talk about this all the time. it was only in my English teacher, GCSE class, English teacher's class, where my teacher actually got me to talk. She got me to talk about Of Mice and Men. I loved it. Talk about Macbeth, talk about those ideas, because as a dyslexic person, I found it really hard to always get my things written down on time. But actually I could talk about it. I was really shy. Nobody believes this ever. But I was really shy up until the age of 16, I swear to you. And it was literally in the English classroom where I found my voice, because I was a good girl. I was like, A star student. I got sat with all the naughty boys. Come on, Paul, you got to get on with your work, kind of girl. That was literally my job, to keep the naughty boys in check and help them with their work. So everyone just didn't even think of me as somebody who needed to speak or share their ideas, except for Mrs. Ahern's class, where she was like, no, Yamina, you are going to speak. If you need more time, that's fine, but you will speak. Or she'd give me a little post-it and she'd write the question down that she was going to ask next to the whole class, to give me time to think about my answer. And it was the first time where I felt like my voice was heard. And if we can tell those stories, and I can guarantee you there are multiple teachers out there, lots of people out there who have one Mrs. Ahern or two Mrs. Aherns who gave them a voice when they were voiceless. That's quite a compelling story, a compelling narrative for teachers who mostly get into teaching to either teach their subject or change lives, of young people. Because Oracy does that. It can literally change the life. Somebody like me, who is quite a gobby man now, but she's quite shy.
There's the title for the podcast written itself there. You've both spoken about kind of the person leading this kind of does this. And I'm interested if there's any kind of, especially like, who should be leading this? Because I suppose traditionally it's like the deputy head of the maths department. This is an extra TOL. Can you do some literacy, some Oracy in schools? Do you think does it have to come within the English department? Do you think that's where it's strongest? Or do you think sometimes it can be led by someone higher who's maybe line manager? I'm just interested if there's any kind of feedback you have from the schools you've worked with.
I think, expertise isn't based on the subject duty. It's just on whether you're an expert or you're a novice, right? Anyone can build expertise if you read enough, if you develop enough, if you implement, I think. But I would say, I think Oracy, like literacy, should come from a senior leadership perspective, because you need somebody on senior leadership, very much like a Senko, who is going to advocate for that, who is going to put that on the school improvement plan. Now, a middle leader is so important, probably, I think, the most important role in a school, I have to say, because you're in the middle, right? But actually, a senior leader adds that sense of priority. I know that sounds like middle leaders don't do that, but a senior leader can then say, no, this needs to be in the school improvement plan. And then the senior leader driving it, but they're not necessarily the people who are implementing it. Actually, the vision shouldn't just come from a senior leader. It should come from a range of stakeholders. Like I said, I was, yes, the deputy head of the Senate leading on literacy and Oracy, but I actually had lead practitioners who were supporting with that. There was teachers who were actually kind of literacy ambassadors in their departments, who then became the disciplinary literacy network. Actually what you then do is you're saying these things are really important, and not just for English teachers or not just SLT member who's leading on it, but actually it's a whole school approach. And I just became obsessed with like this disciplinary literacy Oracy network, because you just hear a different perspective. But there will be art teachers who will say to me, yeah, that particular practice, Yamina, is not going to work, but here's how we might do it. And I think you need that. There's never going to be one expert. I don't believe there's ever going to be one expert in a school who can just lead Oracy and literacy. It might be their R&R, their role and responsibility, and ultimately they're accountable for it being impactful, but they're not the people who make it happen or ensure that our young people become great orators or great listeners, I think. Might disagree.
No, I think you're spot on. What you don't want is people getting coerced into coming along and be like, oh, I've got to be the person who goes to these meetings. And then it's 2 minutes at the end of a department meeting where they go, oh, by the way, Yamina's asked us to do this, so just drop a couple of keywords into every lesson. What you want is to create that passion as a whole school, and then within each department about, like, we want to get this better within our department. Like you said, the example there, that strategy that we just spoke about as a whole school doesn't quite work in our subject, but we can adapt it, we can change it, and we can make something work. And trying to I always think if there's a problem, the people closest to the problem are the best people to solve it. So, if something's not going to work, put it on the departments, get them to solve that problem and find out a strategy that's going to work for them. But yeah, I really like that idea of you having that network, because people then buy into that and people then believe in what they're doing, don't they?
And then what that network allows to happen is those conversations to happen across the school. So I know before I've been in maths department, we've gone and spoke to the science department, been like, oh, we notice this year group is struggling with this kind of language. Can you do that? But if you've got that happening across the whole school, then as you've both alluded to, it becomes this culture, becomes something. It's not, oh, we've got to do some oracy today. It's just like, well, of course we're doing that because it helps our young people and it also helps them in our subject. And I think that's what you're both talking about, just getting teachers to buy into the idea before you just tell them what to do. Like anyone can put up the laminated sheet at the back of the classroom. Like, oh, here's our oracy plan. Like that's not going to help anything. Whereas if in a maths department, for example, when we're planning our curriculum for next year, we go, well, actually, here's all the words or the language we need our students to be confident in. Let's make sure that we're covering that now so they're confident next year. And then when we cover it next year, we start our lessons by going through those words, because everything, as you said, comes from Oracy. So I think that those discussions are really important. Were you wanting to jump in there, Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've just come back from the Inner Drive conference at Eton, Arthur, and someone that Yamina works with, Safian Stig, said, values are lived, not laminated. It's that if you value Oracy, you're going to embed it in everything you do, not just stick something up on the wall, stick something up on the board and say, tokenistically, this is what we do, because you're not going to embed it.
Yeah.
But I think this is a really nice point for us to finish episode 2. And then when you come back for episode 3, we can really, really start talking about what individual teachers can do in their classrooms or their sports halls to make work for our young people. So thanks so much for your time, Yamina, and we're really looking forward to episode 3 with you.
Thank you.
Are you searching for teacher CPD that leads to change, illuminates best practice and inspires your staff? Well, look no further. Inner Drive's Teacher CPD Academy is just what you need. The Teacher CPD Academy now also includes our Teaching Unpacked series, with Doug Lamoff exploring and analysing what great teaching looks like in the classroom. Email us now at tnt@innerdrive.co.uk to grab a free trial. That's tnt@innerdrive.co.uk.